Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar. The topic of today's webinar is the right approach to SAM, focusing specifically on control and visibility. Presenting today, we have Maria Singleton, SAM Licensing Practice Manager from here at Bytes, and we also have Mark Lillywhite, Pre-Sales Consultant from Snow Software. Just going to run through some quick housekeeping with you all. During the webinar you will be muted, but if you do have any questions anytime, please could you submit them on the questions box at the right hand side of the screen. There will be some time for a quick Q&A at the end, so I'll be able to read these questions out should you have any. Just to let you know that the webinar will be recorded and also will be made available after the webinar. And yeah, there's also a critique form when the webinar finishes, so please if you could just fill out a couple of these questions. It'll only take you sort of 30 seconds. That would be much appreciated. I'm now going to hand over to Maria from Bytes, who will be talking to you about the Bytes offering of SAM.
Hello, as Cassie has mentioned, my name is Maria Singleton and I head up the license consultancy part of the SAM practice at Bytes. Next slide please, Cassie. So I'm sure that you've heard this several times, but in terms of software asset management, when we're looking at best practices, it involves various different elements, including people, process and tools. And the majority of the organisations we work with are implementing SAM solutions to help them gain control of a lot of the risk that resides within their estate. And that can be financial, sometimes reputational as well, so it won't go down well if you're found to be non-compliant and have a large bill at the end of it, and that might be publicised, or also operational, because in terms of making sure that you are optimising your investments, it's quite key to make sure you know what you've got deployed versus what you've got entitlement for. And so we spend a lot of time working with our customers to ensure that they are realising the return on investment in their software assets. And one of the fundamental elements of that is ensuring that we've got data that can provide that valuable information to allow us to channel that into a stronger negotiation point with vendors, and also helping to manage the asset life cycle as well. Next slide please, Cassie. So, and again, you probably have to click, thank you. So you can probably relate to a number of the, or one or two of the possible challenges that are faced by customers. But even more so in the current climate, with a lot of migration to cloud, there's a lot of unquantifiable risk within organisations' estates. Also with the change in volume purchase agreements, and then also the challenges about how we capture the data that was historically on-premise, and then looking at sort of how that then relates to the new licensing programs, whether that be user-based or whether it be cloud-based. Next slide please, Cassie. So as part of our offering, Bytes look to complement your own internal SAM teams. So we work with you to and best of breed organisations like Snow Software, and our primary offering is our Bytes asset management platform, where we partner with best of breed vendors like Snow to provide that sort of all-encompassing offering, where we've got the core management platform, and then we build additional services around that, and that might be licensing reviews or process and policy consultancy as well. And that's where I'll hand you over then. I think I haven't got any more slides left now, Cassie. Let me check. So I will hand you on to Mark without any further ado. So just to explain the benefits of using Snow.
Thank you, Maria. Mark, would you like to
Good morning,
take over?
everybody.
Thank you.
Yep. So my name's Mark Lillywhite. I work here in the UK Snow team as one of our pre-sales consultants. And really, the point of this the webinar is to just focus a little bit on the right approach to engaging and building a SAM program. And we've titled this one, the subtitle as Control and Visibility, which kind of gives you a clue as to the main areas that I'll focus on over the next few slides. What is SAM all about? Now, before I answer, I always take a moment to think about who's asking the question, because if you are talking to somebody technical, SAM may well mean, finding the XEs and the DLLs and all that wonderful stuff. If you're talking to the CIO, it's all about costs. It's all about cost mitigation, cost savings potentially, and depending on, if you're a SAM manager, you'll be looking at things like licensing entitlements and cross grades and upgrades and all that good stuff. But I'm always left thinking that maybe ITIL has the simplest explanation, which really comes down to something very straightforward, and it's the ability to manage software assets throughout their stages of their life cycle. And I've just paraphrased it a little bit there. And what that really means is two things. Firstly, you have to accept that software is an asset. It's an asset like a car. It's an asset like a printer. Just because you can't touch it doesn't mean it's not an asset. It has a cost. It has value to the business, and therefore, you need to treat it as an asset in the same way as you would everything else. And the second piece is you have to accept that there's a life cycle of software. So you don't just buy a piece of software and you're done. It has several stages to a life cycle, and it's not a simple life cycle. So if I show you the next slide, what you should be able to see is, a fairly basic, believe it or not, hardware and software life cycle program. And you can sort of see here the 5 main areas. So we've got procurement, and procurement actually comes after somebody's made a decision that a particular piece of software is needed. And that could be very strategic software. So it could be software like SAP or Oracle, something that's absolutely fundamental to the business and costs a large amount of money. Or it could be something very trivial, but also very important, like perhaps a freeware XML converter that a developer uses. Either way, that software is important and needs to be understood why the business needs it or how that software underpins the business. And then we can get into this whole procurement and the steps there, requisition, deployments, and again, deployment is a whole art form in its own right with packaging and all that good stuff. Support, so now we're into the support desk and different versions and different patches and change controls, etc. And very, very importantly, we've got retirement, and this is something I see overlooked quite often actually, is in that process of managing software, the retirement is often, it's kind of, because it's at the end, people don't focus on it very much, but I've certainly seen customers who are paying maintenance on software that's end of life. And by definition, if it's end of life, you cannot receive any software or any maintenance. So therefore, one of the questions that starts to bubble up if you implement a SAM program is procurement decisions. Do we need to pay all of that maintenance, and can we maybe do something different, or do we have to pay extra maintenance? We all remember Microsoft XP and the extended maintenance that could be purchased for vast sums of money, which was a decision that could be made, but only if you had a process in place for looking at that. And we also like to understand about those software assets themselves. So not only, what's the package, what operating systems does it run on, it's also things like how does it fit into the business, why is it being used, and then we're looking at things like the financial information, the entitlement information, the terms and conditions of the contract that came with that software. Tick the EULA box, you've opened up, effectively a whole contract that you need to be, at least understand the basics of. And also have the metrics for measuring that software. And then we can get into, who's using it, how, when, and, what's the next thing that's going to come after that. And all that information is part of a SAM program and is part of understanding it. So it's not just a simple, let's say, put a tool in, off we go. There's a lot more that needs to be understood. And if we think about the right approach, really, there's several steps to that, but the very first step is to understand what the scope is of your SAM program. And again, SAM programs come in stages, so you don't do everything at the same time in a big bang, simply because it's too much. It's quite a large project to get a SAM program working, and you don't have to do everything at the same time. Most customers, in my experience, focus on a particular vendor, perhaps one that they have a worry about, or one that's auditing or reviewing them, or just one where you spend a lot of money and you've got some renewals or some new agreement negotiations coming up, and you focus perhaps on that one vendor, and then maybe you have a top 5 list, and over time you build it into a top 10 list, and certainly large customers that I deal with have a 50. They deal with 50 vendors from a SAM perspective. But having that scope and understanding why you're embarking on a SAM program is very important, because we see customers all the time where effectively an audit is the trigger. But the beautiful thing about SAM is, although the trigger might be an audit or a review, the benefits that you receive over time aren't just less audits, but actually cost savings as well. Whether that's through harvesting on new software, or whether that's through better negotiations and agreements going forward, a SAM program will yield business benefits and financial benefits over time. So, when you know what that scope is, it's time to define a basic plan. You must have executive sponsorship. I sometimes go into customers where perhaps the hardware guys have been tasked with finding a load of software, and so they say, hey, let's get a SAM tool in. That's not executive sponsorship, and the problem with that is it just becomes a tool that gets used and forgotten about. And if you have executive sponsorship, the whole point of a SAM program is it crosses different boundaries. So the infrastructure team will be involved, the desktop team will be involved, the security team will be involved, HR have an interest in a SAM program, because a lot of licenses are based on the number of users, and HR are the ultimate authority on that. But also there's questions that come out sometimes. Why have we got 2,000 users in AD and only 1,800 on the payroll? So identifying the sort of key stakeholders, the consumers of that information, as well as the ultimate SAM manager and the tools guys who are going to make the agents do their magic, is really important, because it crosses so many boundaries, so many silos in an organization. Successful SAM needs executive sponsorship, and the reason for that is to cross those different boundaries. If it just sits within one silo, let's say procurement, for example, yes, procurement gets use out of it, but ultimately other teams can benefit, and sometimes SAM programs fail because the hardware guys spin up a load of new servers without realizing that the procurement team have got this great tool and this great process for figuring out license entitlements, and the communication's just not there. So then once that program, those ownerships have been identified, then you can start to identify and deploy the right technologies. And the idea that SAM is a marriage, right? It's people, process, and technology. And really, the most important thing after you've defined the people is the process. The processes for software asset management, again, time and time again, are overlooked. And whether it's as simple as, how do I, as an end user, get a piece of software? Do I have the ability to, use my credit card, and do I have admin rights and I can go install stuff? Do the server guys have the ability to spin up VMs willy-nilly, put new processes into servers, spin up new SANs? Again, process is the bedrock of software asset management, because that's what gives us control. And once we have control, then we have visibility. And with visibility, we can make smart decisions. So again, process is something that obviously Bytes, you saw it there in the offerings there, and it's sometimes it's the first step. Who are your people and who are your processes? And that really leads into quite an interesting area, which is then the technology. And of course, the technology gives us the ability to start to gather data, apply those rights, and really get into the sort of the guts of a SAM program, which is producing balance statements and estimated savings on new builds that are going to come. Now, again, we want to make sure that when you have the right technology, you've got some processes that have been defined, and you've got the people identified, so the SAM manager in particular. You know, again, I come across organizations where there is no software asset manager. It simply sits in between procurement and you know, an audit readiness team, which is basically the desktop guys and the server guys who get hounded whenever there's a load of information needed. And if you don't have the concept of a SAM role, it doesn't have to be a full-time person necessarily. And again, a lot of that can be managed by, you know, someone like Bytes, who can take a lot of the burden off the SAM role. But somebody needs to be the SAM person or the SAM team, because, you know, at the end of the day, those contracts have got interesting rights, interesting quirks in them that only a person can figure out. So no amount of tools and processes will tell you whether you should switch from per core to per processor, or to CAL-based licenses on SQL, for example. Some tools may recommend things, but trust me, you want to eyeball that information and not just take it as read. And again, that identification of a role and the identification of the people is such an important step, as well as getting those processes right. Now, one of the things that we kind of preach here at Snow when we're talking to various prospects and customers is, when they gain control, you know, SAM is not a project. There is a SAM project, don't get me wrong. If you don't have a tool, if you don't have processes, if procurement simply pay every bill that comes through the door, then you know, you need a project to kind of get things up and running, to get those processes defined and in place, at least some of them, to get some people identified and to get a tool selected. But once you've got that tool selected and the tool implemented, you know, SAM is business as usual. It will go on for as long as the business goes on. It's like the service desk, it's like the software deployment team. It doesn't go away. But the great news is SAM yields huge it yields benefits over time. Instant cost savings, usually through harvesting, and then better cost savings through better negotiation, better procurement. Do you pay SA on everything, or do you pay SA on certain things? Do you switch things in and out of enterprise agreements, or do you go MPSA, or all those good questions that come up? And one of the things that is really important is this idea that you know, there's some education that takes place. So most organizations, when they get to a certain maturity, will have a security education program. And that could be very simple, it could be very complex, but it's this idea that, you know, the 5 easiest ways to hack an organization are through getting a user to click on something. And if we look at well-known hacks like, you know, the JP Morgan hack from a couple of years ago, that was effectively, you know, somebody clicked on an email from somebody else, and that then infected their PC, that allowed a whole chain of events to go on. And so most organizations have a security education program. SAM is no exception to that. Obviously, you know, from an end user perspective, SAM is pretty, is it irrelevant? I don't think it is. You know, they still need to know that licenses cost money. And certainly when I've worked with organizations that implement a software portal with costs and approvals, again, SAM process right there, you've got this concept that users generally don't want to waste the company's money. So the moment they know that WinZip has an implication, and you can show them that through a cost, and 7-zip is completely free of charge and does the same job, most users will pick the 7-zip. So, you know, you're starting to educate people, but get a benefit out of that. And likewise, you know, where it really, that education is really important is when we're looking at people like, you know, server admins, hardware admins, people who have the ability to spin up new hardware, add processors to boxes, spin up new virtual machines. Those teams can and should be educated on the license implication of what they're doing. If you virtualize a copy of Oracle, an Oracle database, you could be exposing the organization to a large amount of cost. And I see this time and time again when I'm evaluating customer estates. If you virtualize a copy of Visio and put it on a Citrix server, you could potentially have to pay for every single person in the organization to access that copy of Visio. And likewise, products like Autodesk, you know, they all have terms and conditions which, you know, the average admin, the average technical person solves a technical problem and isn't aware that if you put that SQL database over here, it's free, and if you put it over there, it's $4 grand. So education is an important part of the business as usual of software asset management. And again, when we look at a software asset management program, it's important to realize that certain things need to happen on a regular basis. So firstly, it's continuous improvement. Review those processes, refine those processes, potentially implement new processes in order to get the SAM up there. So procurement should now have the ability to look into a SAM tool in order to figure out whether people are using something that's got a renewal on it or a maintenance update or whatever. Are you using the best versions of software available that you're paying for? Again, sometimes users are quite happy using Visio 2003, but Visio 2016 completely integrated with SharePoint. So why, we want you to use that functionality. Do you have a process for looking at licensing models? Licensing models change all the time, and all the vendors change them all the time. And a good tool like Snow, we're coding in the back end some of those licensing changes so that core factor calculations can take place automatically. But they change so regularly that you need to eyeball those changes and understand them over time. So a quarterly licensing review of your top 5 vendors, make sure nothing's changed, understand what's going on, how are things being virtualized now. A process for ensuring that contracts and potentially the media, so do you have a definitive software library, sorry, and where your purchase order is being stored. Is that accessible? Is it in the tool, or is it in a filing cabinet somewhere? So again, those processes are important, and you don't just put them in once and forget about it. You put them in, and then again, like ITIL, like change processes, you regularly review how those processes are functioning and what exceptions are occurring. Sometimes, we see customers with a lot of part-time staff have different policies, slightly different policies. If you have a lot of home workers, for example, then again, how does that relate to IT equipment and the software on there? And back to the idea that an education program, deep for the people who can make big changes, light for the people who can make small changes, but again, educating people as to the cost of licenses and the cost back to the company and giving credible alternatives can really help to save money over time. Now, a really interesting area of control is this idea of change controls. Every organization has change control processes. Some are very mature, some are very light, but either way, you don't just rip out a server without somebody figuring out what that server is doing and why it's doing it. And likewise, with software licenses, by having a step in the change controls that require SAM review, that can really drive both awareness, because everyone involved in the change realizes there's a SAM step, but also it can really reduce risk. So, that new project that needs that new virtual server running Oracle, that's at the SAM step is going to get rejected or at least changed into something cheaper, rather than without that step, the admin virtualizes and we're good, right, until the next review comes along. So we really advocate that have your change control process have a SAM step in it, because although some change controls may not need it, a lot will, and it builds awareness both ways of the SAM coverage. So, that then starts to elicit better behavior from the people who can make some big risk changes, and also, again, estate coverage. So the number one thing that an auditor will do when they step into audit or review is they'll say, show me Active Directory, show me how many assets you have. And I would not bet a pound that there's a single customer who can accurately say, right now, I have exactly this many assets. It's such a fine art. Things are coming into the organization, things are leaving the organization, things are lost, things are stolen. And so understanding your estate and having good coverage and having good checks and balances to make sure that what's in AD matches what's in your antivirus system, matches what's in SCCM, that's good policy to make sure that the number you're working to, the coverage you're looking at, is as accurate as it possibly can be. And if you're up at the 95, 98% coverage, then you're doing pretty well. You know, the 100% is nirvana, but time and time again, 85% seems to be what's achievable easily, but then you need to put processes in place to get from 85% to 95%. So network scanning technologies potentially, you know, checking what's in antivirus. How do you know, looking at, you know, router logs, what's been connecting to our routers, because that's different to what's in Active Directory. Again, licensing skills and licensing models, so training the SAM team or using, you know, the Bytes SAM team to really make sure that you're getting the maximum value out of those licenses. Again, that's a really important area, because Snow, you know, for example, will automate a lot of those licensing downgrades and cross-grades and give you a much better bang for your buck. But there are still, you know, things you could have agreed in a negotiation that you didn't, which then come back to haunt you. So, you know, we're seeing customers now who will have a 5-year enterprise agreement, because then they can keep the Windows Server processor model for 5 years. Whereas, you know, 2016 switches to a core model in September, I believe. So again, there's decisions you can make if you have licensing knowledge, or if you have, you know, a SAM partner who's giving you that licensing knowledge. So just to sort of finalize, you know, SAM's all about visibility, and visibility and control go hand in hand there. There's a nice quote here, which are, there are known knowns, there are known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns. And I just want to go back for a second to that. The stuff we know about, we can deal with. The stuff we know we don't know about, we can put a plan in place. We can either take a risk view and say, actually, we're not worried, or we can say, no, we really do need to do network scanning because we just don't have a clue what's on the network. But at least we know that we can do something. But it's the unknown unknowns are the ones that can catch us out. So, you know, we had a customer who literally had 12 data centers, 12 clusters of, you know, virtual data centers, and then during the implementation, figured out they had a 13th. And, you know, that 13th data center was unknown to the server team in the main country that we were dealing with. It'd been spun up on the side in Bratislava or somewhere like that. And that unknown unknown could expose a huge amount of risk to the organization. So again, it's putting processes in place to make sure that you're not caught out is as important as monitoring the processes you do have once you start your SAM program and keep it going. Now, I just want to finish on 2 things, and really it's very simple and very obvious, but we can put it under the category of blowing your own trumpet. When a SAM program gets in place, yeah, so you put the processes in, you select your tool, you implement the tool, procurement are aware, they now ask the SAM team, or maybe SAM team are part of procurement, but the idea that, you know, every time a spend on software is made, a question is asked first, you know, that's great, but who knows about it? So, you know, at our user event recently, we had a customer who they produce a monthly report that goes to that executive stakeholder right at the beginning and his peers, or her peers, to say, this is what the SAM program delivered this month. And these are the difficulties that the SAM program had this month. So the report is just a simple 1-pager. It's just got the basics, you know, total coverage, 88%, you know, next month's coverage, 92% goal. And then it'll say this month's cost savings, you know, £212,000. This month's risk avoidance, you know, 1.2 million. And then perhaps, you know, some basic stats around the number of requests that are coming into the SAM team and any upcoming negotiations that are being planned and worked on. And that simple 1-pager does 2 things. It drives awareness across the organization that there is a SAM program, but also it really flies that flag that, you know, SAM programs save money and avoid risk and put the company in a much better position to use the software it needs to drive the business programs that are the reason for the business. So visibility after the event is as important as, you know, the basic nuts and bolts of figuring out, you know, how many PCs you've got, how many servers you've got, and which ones are virtualized. So that concludes the slides from myself. I will now hand back to Amy in order to do any Q&A. So I just need to Change presenter. Back. Job done.
Thank you, Mark. Great presentation. I'm just going to have a quick look to see if we've got any questions from anybody. If you do have anything that you're thinking about asking, you can pop it into the questions box on the right-hand side now. There actually is a couple in there. So, Mark, someone's asked, where's the best place to start with a SAM program?
Okay, so a SAM program is, it's so far-reaching that, the best place to start is always with an executive sponsor and with people and process. Now, working for a tool vendor, it might seem strange for me to say, don't start with a tool, because obviously, that's how we make our money. But I would say time and time again, and I'll use a very basic quote, which is a bit cheeky, but a fool with a tool is still a fool. So if you don't have the right people identified and you don't have, the right processes, even the basic processes of locking down people's PCs, of making sure that servers can't be spun up willy-nilly, then a SAM program is just a rear-view mirror. It's showing you, what happened that gave you the bill that you now have, rather than preempting the whole thing. So again, start with people and start with process, and leave the tool a little bit longer, because the tool bit's easy in a way. Implementing a tool is, it's a day or two at most. Rolling out an agent is, 30 days, you've got 85% coverage. But without the people in the process, it's gappy and there'll be problems.
Sure. Okay, great. Another one here we have, do you have a contract manager piece on the Snow tool? If you do, is it possible to log more than just start and end dates?
So we do have a contract management piece. It does have start and end dates. With the latest version of Snow, you can put in annual dates. So if you have a 3-year contract, you can have 3 one-year terms. So I think the answer is yes. And if you'd like a demonstration, then contact the Bytes team and they can organize a demonstration, or they can pass it to me.
Perfect, thanks Mark. And just another one here popped up. How do mobile devices fit into a SAM program?
So that's an interesting question, because we're kind of treading carefully between being the boogeyman, but also trying to just start to alert and make people aware that, if there's 1.5 billion desktops and laptops in the world, there's currently something like 4 billion mobile devices, so phones and tablets in the world. And, it's no accident that Microsoft Surface Pro has a 10.1-inch screen, and yet Samsung are producing things with a 9.7-inch screen. And you might ask, what's the difference? What's 0.4 of an inch between friends, right? And the answer is the licensing terms, and specifically the licensing terms for Office 365. So Office 365 on a 10-inch and above screen is a 1 of your 5. And if it's on a tablet with 9.7-inch or below, then it's free. So what we're seeing now in the industry is vendors are looking to monetize anything to do with mobile devices from their software. So Adobe have apps that you can put on phones. Yet if you put more than one app, suddenly there's a potential license implication. Oracle, if you're accessing a back-end Oracle database from an app that's on your phone, and you don't have processor licensing on that Oracle database, you've got to get a named user for every single user. So there's implications that are coming from mobile devices that are just unforeseen. That's the unknown unknown. And the vendors are getting smart. And let me maybe finish on this. Now that we're in a post-Brexit era, what does that mean? It means we have economic uncertainty in varying degrees over the next 3 years. Economic uncertainty is the thing that will, well, ask yourself the question, will aggressive software vendors audit more or less if their revenue streams are being impacted by economic uncertainty due to Brexit? And I would bet a pound that it'll be more. So getting a SAM program in place and really being more ready for reviews, audits, negotiations is more critical now after the vote than it has ever been. And that will only continue.
Okay, great. Just very, very quickly, another question from the person who who asked about the contract manager piece. They were asking what about the terms within the contract?
Yeah, so again, terms can mean several things. So there's things like downgrade, upgrade, cross-grade, multi-platform, so those sorts of terms, that's all catered for in the license, actually, not the contract. But that's catered for within Snow as a tool. If the terms are, I don't know, a special side negotiation to allow, the user's dog to have access as well as the user, then that's that's not something the tool can take care of. But then there's, there's tabs for storing documents, there's tabs for storing text. You can create custom fields to store information, tick boxes, drop-down lists. So you can add whatever you need to into the contract or into the license. But if it's one of those first ones, so downgrade, upgrade, cross-grade, multi-platform, then those are absolutely, you tick the boxes and then the rights get applied by Snow automatically.
Perfect, thank you, Mark. Okay, so we'll round that up there. If you do have, anybody has any questions at a later point in the day, please feel free to email tellmemore@bytes.co.uk and we'll get a response over to you as soon as we can and put you in touch with someone that can help. And other than that, thank you, Mark, for presenting today. Thank you, Maria. And yep, have a great day, everybody. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.